You know, if you've ever been down to a harbor or seen a big ship, you've definitely noticed it. These massive vessels, and they almost all have that same specific rusty red bottom. It's so common, we just kind of accept it. But why? Why that color? Well, today we're gonna find out.
Right? It's one of those things you've seen a million times, but maybe never really thought about. Whether it's a huge container ship, a fancy cruise liner, or even a Navy vessel, that dark red below the waterline is just always there. And it turns out it's not about aesthetics at all. It's actually a tradition born from a centuries-long battle with the sea itself.
Okay, so here's the quick and dirty answer. That's not just any old paint. It's a super specialized, high-tech coating called anti-fouling paint. And its one and only job is to act like a force field to stop an entire ecosystem of marine critters from setting up shop on the ship's hull.
And here's the real kicker, the key to the whole mystery. That red color was never a design choice. It was a chemical side effect. For more than 150 years, the single most effective ingredient they could put in that paint just happened to be red. So what is this huge problem that this red paint is trying to solve?
Well, the moment any ship touches the water, it enters a war. It's a constant fight against an unseen enemy. This enemy has a name. It's called biofouling. And it's a problem that costs the global shipping industry billions, with a B, every single year.
So what is biofouling? Basically, it's the gradual takeover of a ship's hull by thousands of different marine organisms. It all starts with a thin layer of slime, but pretty soon you've got algae, tube worms, and of course, the most famous culprits, barnacles, all attaching themselves, creating this thick, rough, living carpet all over the ship.
And the fallout from all this spilled up? Oh, it's brutal. A hole covered in this stuff isn't smooth anymore. It's like dragging a shaggy rug through the water, which creates enormous drag. That makes the ship's engine work way, way harder, burning a ton more fuel just to go the same speed. Not to mention, it can actually damage the hull and even ferry invasive species to whole new parts of the world.
Just to put this into perspective, look at this number. A ship with a really bad case of biofouling can see its fuel use jump by up to 30%. 30. In an industry where fuel is one of the absolute biggest expenses, a number like that is just staggering. It's a huge economic and environmental problem.
So naturally, people have been fighting this problem for as long as they've been sailing. And that's led to this really fascinating history of innovation, this kind of arms race between sailors and sea creatures that goes back for centuries. Way back in ancient times, it was pretty simple: tar and pitch. Then, in the mid-1700s, the British Navy had this major breakthrough. They started nailing thin sheets of pure copper right onto their wooden ships. See, copper is toxic to marine life, so it worked like a charm. The problem was, when ships started being made of iron, the copper sheets made the iron rust like crazy. The big solution finally came in 1863, the first paint with copper mixed right in. After a pretty dark period in the 20th century using some really nasty chemicals, we've now landed on the advanced paints we use today.
And all that history leads us right to the chemistry, which is where we finally get the answer to our question. Why red? Well, the answer is hiding in that key ingredient that made the paint work so well in the first place: copper.
Okay, so here's where the light bulb goes on. The active ingredient in the paint isn't metallic copper, like a shiny new penny that eventually turns green. No, it's a compound called cuprous oxide. And cuprous oxide in its natural mineral form is a dark reddish-brown powder. So when you mix that powerful barnacle-killing powder into your paint, guess what color the whole batch turns? Red.
I saw this comment from a Reddit user that just boils it down so perfectly. The stuff that worked to keep the critters off, well, it just happened to be red. It's really as simple as that. The color was a byproduct of the function.
But wait, there's more. There was another huge factor that basically cemented red as the color: good old-fashioned money. Around the same time, one of the cheapest and toughest paint pigments you could buy was something called Venetian red, which is basically a type of rust. Since you need thousands and thousands of gallons of paint for a ship, going with a cheap and durable pigment was a total no-brainer. And, what do you know? It was also red.
Okay, so that explains the history. But come on, modern chemistry is incredible. Surely we can make this paint any color we want now, right? So why do we still see red hulls all over the place?
And that's exactly right. Today's technology means these anti-fouling coatings can be made in pretty much any color you can imagine. Blue, green, black, whatever. The active ingredient doesn't have to define the final color anymore. So the reason red has stuck around isn't about chemistry these days. It's about tradition and some very practical reasons.
It really comes down to three big things. First, just plain old tradition. The shipping world is built on it, and the red hull is an iconic look. Second is safety. The line where the red paint stops often marks the ship's maximum safe load line, the Plimsoll line. It's a super clear visual check to make sure the ship isn't dangerously overloaded. And third, visibility. That high contrast red is easy for divers to see when they're inspecting the hull underwater, and it helps search and rescue teams spot a capsized ship from the air.
So, as you can see, this is so much more than just a quirky tradition. This humble red paint job is actually a critical piece of technology that has a huge impact on our entire global economy. Let's just zoom out for a second and look at the sheer scale of this.
Just try to wrap your head around this number. 200 million square meters. That is the total underwater surface area of every large ship on the planet. An area bigger than Washington, D.C. that all needs to be protected by this special kind of paint. It's just massive.
And keeping those hulls clean has this staggering ripple effect across the globe. It saves huge amounts of fuel, which means fewer greenhouse gas emissions. It protects fragile ecosystems by stopping invasive species from hitching a ride. It saves the industry billions of dollars, which helps keep the price of everything you buy a little bit lower. At the end of the day, this red paint is a quiet, unsung hero of global trade.
So that red hull really is a symbol, isn't it? It's a story of chemistry, economics, and tradition all rolled into one. But that story is still being written. New technologies are coming out all the time. Biocide-free coatings that are so slick that nothing can even grab onto them in the first place. Which leaves us with one last question to think about. As this new science takes over, will the ocean's most iconic color finally, after all these years, begin to fade away?